Alright, you know, there's a lot of people that bitch about um, soldering connectors or doing things, and plus I get planes with connectors that aren't soldered on right at times, you know, and it's kind of detrimental to the health of your plane. So, you know, I figured I need to change this little connector out to a Dean's connector, so I figured I'd video record just to show how I solder connectors. First and foremost, okay, especially with like a Dean's connector or whatever, them pins aren't very long, okay? You don't have to peel back a mile of the insulator of the wire, okay? I mean, even a quarter inch is too much. It's like you need an eighth, maybe a little over an eighth. That's it. No more. Boom. See that? That's all you need. Boom. All you need. Now, this type wire doesn't like to take solder until it gets very, very hot. I've noticed that. A lot of these ESC wires are like this. Flux pen. Flux is your friend. Right? Shake it up and just tap the tip on your thing, on your wires. Allows the solder to flow. Once it starts going, it'll get sucked into the wire. Next, the tip of your soldering iron. See if you can see that? See how it's nice and clean and shiny? There's no solder on this, but that's how your soldering tip needs to look. If it doesn't look this way, you need to sand it down and re-tin it with solder. If it doesn't look clean like this, also it's also good to have, you know, you don't have to have a station, but just even a sponge, a wet sponge, just so after you get your solder on, you can clean it. Rub it off. Me, when I have excess solder, I mean, I kind of just like flick it into the the trash can and then just wipe off the nastiness. Okay. So, before anything, we need to tin these wires. Alright? Let me get my solder. My soldering iron. You know, you can use the helping hands. You know, but since this isn't a plane, it makes it kind of harder, so I'm just going to do it where it sits. Alright? You need to get just a teensy bit of solder on your iron. Okay? It's kind of too much, so I'm going to flick some of that off. Alright? About like that. Okay? You're going to touch it to the wire. Let it sit for a second. Let that solder work the heat up onto that wire. And then you're going to touch, not your iron, but the wire with your solder. And it's just going to flow into the wire. You know, I'm going to clean it up a little bit. Make sure it's all nice and uniform on the wire. Okay? Then do your other wire. Same way, make sure you got just a speck of solder on your iron. Touch that speck of solder to the wire. Hold it on there for a minute. Let it heat that wire up. And then touch the wire. Let the wire melt the solder, not the iron. Actually, I had so much solder on the actual iron that it almost tinned itself. I got too much solder on there actually. So when you have too much solder, you can either use like a vacuum thing, which I have one, but I'm not going to go get it, or you can just peel it off onto your iron, flick your iron. I got an ashtray here. I'm not doing it on the ground. It kind of looks like I am, but there's an ashtray right there. But just get it off, get as much of the excess off as you can. I mean, I guess it wouldn't hurt to have this much solder on there, but it's not going to look pretty. Okay. Now, Wipe your solder iron off, you know, sit it down for a minute. Now we're going to do the Dean's connector, okay? A lot of times people need to plug these into the other because if you heat these up too much, yada yada yada. I'm not going to do it enough to where it's going to hurt anything, so I'm just going to hold it in my hand. A little bit of flux, a little bit of flux. Alright. First, this time since I'm going to hold it in my hand, I'm going to put a lot of solder on my iron. Like so. Okay? And then I'm just going to set the ball on the connector and let it sit there until it flows off of my iron and onto the Dean's connector. Like that. Okay? There's still some excess solder on my iron. I'm going to flick it off. Alright? Then we'll go to the other side. We're going to put another ball of solder on my iron. Right? Then sit the ball on the Dean's connector and let it sit there and let it flow off of the iron and onto the connector itself. I'm just going to wait. You'll see it flow once you get that copper to the right temperature, or whatever the material that this is made out of. Dean's connector. This one's taking a bit longer. There it goes. And there. Alright. Good. Wipe my soldering iron off again. Put it away. Now, go ahead and put your heat shrink tube on. Don't forget to do it. I do it all the time. I always forget, and I always have to unsolder my shit and put it back on there. But I'm not going to do the dummy for this video. Alright. Now, I like to do the positive first because on the way that these T-connectors are set up. But, again, this time you want to put solder back on your iron. A very small amount, because you don't need to actually add any more solder. You've got enough solder on the Dean's connector and that to basically make this work. Alright? So, yeah, the Dean's connector is still a little warm, but it'll be alright. I don't really think I can get an angle where you can see this, but I'll try my best. But set these two together. I sit on the iron. I sit on the wire first. Melt into the wire and then onto the Dean's connector. And I push them down until the actual wire of the wire is actually touching the Dean's connector. You know, I'm not, oops, my little stand fell down, but okay. I'm not actually, you don't want a gap of solder between your electrical joints. You want your, you know, the wire's metal wire to touch the metal of the Dean's connector. So I'm going to just let it melt down on there until that happens. Sometimes you might have to, I gotta heat the connector fluid up, or the solder up with first, and then heat up the wire, and then put them together. I mean, this is a lot easier with helping hands, but since this is on the plane like this, then yeah. Alright, so yeah, positives on. Alright, I'm not going to make this video pretty much any longer, but if I have to, but I mean, really, you do the same thing with this one, and then, you know, hey, you put the heat shrink tube on and you're done. Good solder connections. Quit. I don't want to see any more of these bullshit connections. Please, everyone, fix this. Do it right.